Now, I was going to make this video regardless, which is to say I was going to talk about comparison, but it just so happens that the magnificent Lord Pete, master of all taxes, slayer of tax dragons, lord of gingers, and the scion of Dagda, made a video addressing a question or request that I had, and I will post that video down in the low bar. But we got into a little discussion about the nature of comparison, not too lengthy because it was covering a different subject. But I want to address this matter of comparison in this video because when Pete says, for example, and he's absolutely right, on some level, that comparison is the thief of joy, yeah, comparison is the thief of joy, especially when it becomes hyper-neurotic and obsessive to the point that it cripples you. There's no question about that, I think. But the problem with trying to avoid that situation is that, as I've said probably over the years many times, although not as explicitly as I'm saying here, is that the world operates on comparison. And therefore, it's simply an inevitability until you two compare yourself to others. Now, obviously there are instances where you're not being compared. You're just being ignored. In fact, arguably, most of the time you're being ignored. Most people are not interested in you as an individual. That's just the way it is. There might be some exceptions. These might be famous or grand individuals of great ability, whatever. But most people are just being ignored. However, when you're called into question, in whatever context it might be, you become the subject of comparison, which is to say, you're on the dating market. You will be compared to other men. How well do you do against these other men if you're trying to pursue either box or a relationship or any combination thereof? And of course, this also comes into play when you're applying for a job. You're going to be compared to other people, applying for a university position to study, and so on and so forth. These sorts of comparisons are universal, they're inevitable, they're just going to happen. And I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. But comparison also comes into play with the self. Let's say, for example, from your childhood onwards, you've had a lasting interest in art, creating art, drawing, painting, whatever. You practice, and you're really, really interested, and it really fulfills you. And maybe even your parents say, oh, that's pretty good what you're doing there. But then you start taking some art classes. Maybe your school offers some art as an extracurricular activity, or it's just part of the curriculum in and of itself. And then you realize, as you see other people in the class pursuing the art, wow, my art is actually pretty crappy. As in, it's objectively bad. I really enjoyed this. Now, I suppose if you have a will of iron, as they put it, or you're one of those rare individuals for whom it doesn't matter, as in the quality of what you're doing simply doesn't matter, you could say, okay, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to keep on doing my art. Even though qualitatively it's much worse than other people's in this particular example. But I'd also argue that one of the reasons why you enjoyed doing art is because you thought you were actually good at it. People typically don't pursue things they're not good at. The joy that they get out of these things typically comes from the fact that they're pretty good at it, or even very good at it. So you probably would have been content simply with producing crappy art on your own if you thought it had been crappy the whole time. No, you thought you were pretty good, but you had no basis of comparison. All of a sudden you enter school, you see other people are much, much better. Indeed, you see people who have barely practiced a day and they just have a natural knack for it. So they're just drawing things much more accurately. You take still life classes and wow, their vases and their roses are just that much better. It looks like a photograph rendered by the hand, whereas your rendering looks like something a 5-year-old might have produced. Now, I'm being hyperbolic, obviously, but you get my point. Comparison is inevitable. It's unavoidable. There's no way you can go through life never comparing yourself to others, if only because the way we establish metrics in the world and the way we establish our understanding of where we stand and other people stand is based on comparison. We have this idea of a mean. There's a mean for virtually everything, every trait. As I pointed out to the inimitable Baron of Brooklyn, the reason why we know Pete at 6'4" is extremely tall is because he's well above the average, because most men will cluster around a mean. They'll be 5'9", 5'10", 5'8", 5'7", something like that. But he's 6'4", so we know he's very tall, so he's far to the right of the bell curve. The same applies to intelligence. The same applies to looks. This whole idea, the obsession of the modern early 20-something teenage black pill with face ratings and what have you. The emergence of the looks-based term normie refers to an average, right? So comparison is the basis of our understanding of the world as other people relate to it, but also as we relate to it. And there's just no way around that. So yes, comparison can easily be the thief of joy, but it's a thief that will inevitably rob you. Nobody escapes it. Some people escape it to a greater degree, and some people have all their goods and all their belongings robbed by this thief. But if you're pursuing anything, doing anything, in the vast majority of cases, unless you're some freak of nature, and such freaks exist, talking about the vast majority of people, your ability to be content with what you're doing, or even the way you are, is based on comparison to some degree. The art example was a pretty salient example, but I could talk about anything else. Why do so-called sub-5s feel misery and dismay? It's because they're not just not average, they're below average. They're being compared to other people. And it's all well and good to talk about locus of control. But locus of control is a very wishy-washy term, and your mileage with it is going to vary enormously by individual. Generally speaking, people are pleased with themselves when they know they're good at something, or they look good, or whatever. They have some outstanding quality, or several, that outshine the other qualities they have. But that doesn't mean anything until you enter the real world, where comparison inevitably takes place. Now, of course, you could make the argument, and it is a good argument, that everyone is starting from a different place. So it doesn't really make sense to compare. Perhaps not logically, but people do it nonetheless. When Chad gets all the chicks, or the job that you did not get, nobody is thinking, well, he had the advantage of really good genes. They're still going to choose him regardless, right? So the argument that everyone started from a different place with different variables doesn't really help. If I, who am not particularly smart, learn how to program Python, for example, on a really basic level, that is going to be a huge achievement for me. But compared to millions and millions of people who can do Python with their hands tied behind their back and a dozen other programming and coding languages, it's nothing. It's not really relevant. And the benefit I have from it will be minimal. I would be better advised just to hire someone to program something in Python for me to take care of whatever issue I have. It would be more efficient, and the end result would be better quality. Should you or should you not compare yourself to others? You will. It's an inevitability. Everyone will do it. The world will force you to. The real question is, how do you navigate that without turning completely neurotic? And as the Lord of Gingers pointed out in his video, referring to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, etc., that pyramid ideally needs to be at least partly filled. So it might be easy for Sir Pete to not compare himself to others because, frankly speaking, he has a support network in the form of friends and family, all these other things. But I've known plenty of people, their only thing that they have is their talent, their skill, whatever it might be. They don't have anything else going for them. And so not comparing yourself, especially when that one thing is the only thing earning them money, right? What do you do then? The only thing you can do in those cases is become resigned. But resignation typically does not engender motivation and doesn't energize you to do things. That seems to be the only plausible solution to this, except that comparison is inevitable, but without becoming so dismayed by this thief that you become completely paralyzed and inert. At the end of the day, the only thing it seems an individual can do is engage in a bunch of psychological tricks and self-deception in order to somehow escape this thief and its robbery of you. And there's nothing wrong with mind tricks or self-deception. We all engage in it to some degree. It's just there are hard limits to that. Anyway, I hope that clears up this issue, at least for some people. And whatever our differences, Sir Pete, Lord of Ireland, I very much appreciate your existence. You have a fantastic channel, and even though I disagree with you quite frequently on a number of things, I'm nonetheless grateful that you're doing what you're doing. As always, thanks for tuning in. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, comment, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I will check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.